Imagine a nation divided against itself. Brothers fighting brothers, neighbors turning on neighbors, and a war so devastating that it cost more American lives than any other conflict in history. But what could possibly drive the United States, a young country barely 80 years old, into such brutal bloodshed? Today, we uncover the real reasons behind the American Civil War. You are watching Legacy Line. The Civil War began in April 1861 and raged until 1865, tearing apart a nation that was still young and fragile. In just 4 years, more than 600,000 Americans were killed, more than in any other war the United States has ever fought. But this was not a war for territory or empire. It was a war over identity, a battle for the soul of the nation itself. At the center of the conflict stood one defining question. Could America endure as a country divided between freedom and slavery, or would it be forced to choose a single path forward? Slavery was not just a Southern institution, it was the very foundation of its society, economy, and identity. Vast plantations of cotton, tobacco, and rice generated enormous wealth. But that wealth was built on the backs of enslaved men, women, and children who were denied the most basic human rights. In the North, however, the industrial economy thrived on factories, trade, and wage labor, and growing numbers of Americans came to see slavery as both morally wrong and incompatible with a modern nation. The clash was not only about economics, it was about two completely different visions of America's future. One clinging to human bondage as a way of life, and the other pushing toward freedom and progress. Each new territory that joined the Union reignited the same explosive question. Would it allow slavery, or would it be free? With every debate, the divide deepened, and the United States moved one step closer to war. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the moment when compromise finally collapsed. Lincoln was not an abolitionist in the radical sense. He did not plan to abolish slavery where it already existed, but he firmly opposed its spread into new territories. To the South, that position was unacceptable. They saw it as the first step toward the destruction of their entire way of life. His victory, won without carrying a single Southern state, convinced Southern leaders that they had lost their voice in the Union. Within weeks, 7 states seceded and declared themselves a new nation, the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. For the Union, this was an act of rebellion. For the Confederacy, it was a declaration of independence. But one thing was certain: the United States could no longer remain united. On April 12, 1861, the long brewing storm finally broke. In Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter, a federal stronghold still held by Union troops. For 34 hours, shells rained down, lighting the sky and shaking the nation awake. No one was killed in the bombardment, but its impact was earth-shaking. The next day, the fort surrendered, and the Civil War had officially begun. What had started as decades of heated debates and bitter compromises now erupted into open war. In the North, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. In response, 4 more Southern states joined the Confederacy. The time for negotiation was over. The United States was split in two, and both sides prepared for a fight that would decide the nation's future. Southern leaders often claimed that the war was about states' rights, the right of each state to govern itself without interference from Washington. But when we look closely, one truth becomes undeniable. The right they most fiercely defended was the right to own slaves. Their speeches, their secession documents, and their new Confederate Constitution all pointed to slavery as the cornerstone of their cause. For the Union, however, the war was not just about ending slavery. It was about preserving the nation. If states could leave whenever they disagreed, the United States would cease to exist. At its core, the Civil War was not simply a battle over law or policy. It was a clash between two visions of America, one built on bondage and one struggling toward freedom. The Civil War happened because America could no longer live divided, half slave, half free. For decades, compromise had delayed the inevitable, but it could not erase the truth. A nation built on liberty could not endure while millions remained in chains. By 1865, the Union was preserved, slavery was abolished, and a new chapter of American history began. Yet the price was staggering. Over 600,000 lives lost, entire cities destroyed, and families torn apart forever. The Civil War was America's greatest tragedy, but also its greatest test, forcing the nation to redefine its values and its future. It reminds us that when injustice is ignored, conflict becomes unavoidable, and the cost is measured in human lives. The war ended slavery, but the struggle for equality and unity continued long after the guns fell silent.